What if the thing you fear the most isn't fear itself, but what comes after it? What if your anxiety isn't a curse, but a message, a guide leading you to the life you were meant to live? You've spent years trying to fight it, silence it, escape it. But what if the secret to freedom isn't running, but listening? In this story, you're going to discover a truth so powerful, it will change the way you see yourself forever. And once you hear it, there's no going back. The rain pounded against the windshield as Emma tightened her grip on the steering wheel. It was late, too late to be out driving alone on a road slick with regret. She blinked against the neon glow of a gas station sign, the words "Open 24 hours" flickering like a half-hearted promise. The tension in her shoulders refused to ease, coiled tight like a wire pulled to its breaking point. The call from her boss still echoed in her mind. "Emma, we need to talk first thing tomorrow." Those 6 words had detonated an anxiety bomb inside her chest, sending her spiraling through every possible worst-case scenario. Was she being fired? Had she made a mistake in the marketing report? Or worse, had someone finally noticed how often she sat at her desk, staring blankly at her screen, paralyzed by the weight of expectations she could never meet? Her fingers fumbled as she parked the car beside the gas pump. The night air was thick with the scent of wet pavement and something else, something old, like faded dreams clinging to the corners of forgotten places. She had intended to drive home, but the thought of stepping into her tiny apartment, where the walls pressed in and the silence screamed, was unbearable. She needed a distraction, anything. That's when she saw it. Through the glass window of the gas station convenience store, wedged between a rack of overpriced snacks and a stack of gossip magazines, a book caught her eye. The title glowed under the fluorescent lights, like a beacon, Beyond Anxiety by Martha Beck. Emma let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. She almost ignored it. After all, she had tried everything before: meditation apps, therapy podcasts, late-night Google searches that promised a 5-step cure to the constant gnawing in her chest. But something about the book made her pause. Maybe it was the word beyond, as if there really was something waiting for her outside the suffocating fog of her thoughts. She stepped inside, the bell above the door jingling softly, and reached for the book. And in that moment, Emma had no idea that this small decision, this impulse, buy at a rundown gas station, was about to change everything. Emma turned the book over in her hands, its cover slick under the harsh fluorescent lights. Beyond Anxiety, Curiosity, Creativity, and Finding Your Life's Purpose. The words felt almost mocking. She had spent years trying to fix herself, trying to shake the feeling that at any moment, everything would fall apart. The cashier, a middle-aged woman with tired eyes and a name tag that read Lorraine, glanced up from her crossword puzzle. "That one's good," she said, nodding toward the book. "I read it last year. Changed the way I see things." Emma hesitated. "Really?" Lorraine shrugged. "I mean, it's not magic or anything, but it made me realize I was spending my whole life trying to control things that weren't mine to control." Emma swallowed. That hit a little too close to home. She dug into her bag for her wallet and handed over the money. Lorraine rang her up and slid the book into a thin plastic bag. "Hope it helps," she said. Emma offered a weak smile and turned to leave. The rain had slowed to a drizzle, mist curling around the streetlights. She climbed back into her car, tossing the book onto the passenger seat, where it sat beside an old coffee cup and a crumpled fast food bag. She should just go home, try to sleep. But instead she found herself reaching for the book, flipping to the first chapter. Emma read the words once, then again, her tired mind struggling to process them. The author described anxiety in a way she had never considered before, not as a personal flaw, but as something wired into human nature, a survival mechanism gone rogue. Anxiety isn't fear, the book explained. Fear is a reaction to an immediate danger. Anxiety is what happens when your brain convinces you that a danger exists, even when it doesn't. Emma exhaled, a bitter laugh catching in her throat. That was her life in a single sentence. She turned the page. The author told a story about a woman who had suffered from severe anxiety her whole life, until she started experimenting with curiosity. Instead of running from her anxious thoughts, she started questioning them. Is this really true? What else could be happening here? Emma frowned. It sounded simple, almost too simple. She had spent years in therapy, talking in circles about her stress. But the idea of curiosity? She had never thought to be curious about her anxiety. She had only ever tried to silence it. She read on, flipping through pages that explained how the brain gets stuck in an anxiety spiral, how fear feeds on itself, how trying to control everything only makes it worse. The book described a concept called the Hall of Mirrors, how the left side of the brain, the part responsible for logic and language, could trap someone in a loop of anxious thoughts, convincing them that their worst fears were absolute truth. Emma stared at the words, her fingers tightening around the book. She thought about how many times she had done this. How many times she had convinced herself that she was failing, that people were judging her, that she wasn't good enough. She thought about every sleepless night spent replaying old conversations, analyzing every word she had said, searching for proof that she had embarrassed herself. The book wasn't just describing anxiety in general. It was describing her. A car pulled into the gas station, its headlights momentarily flooding the interior of Emma's car. She blinked, realizing she had been sitting there for nearly half an hour. Shoving the book into her bag, she started the engine and pulled back onto the road. But the words lingered. What if you stopped trying to control your thoughts? What if you stopped running from them and started questioning them instead? As she drove through the quiet streets, she found herself testing the idea. What if I'm not getting fired tomorrow? The question felt ridiculous, but still she tried to answer it. Maybe my boss just wants to discuss a project. Maybe it's not bad news at all. Maybe I've spent the last 4 hours spiraling over something that isn't even real. The thought wasn't exactly comforting, but it was different. And different, Emma realized, was a start. When she got home, she expected the familiar dread to settle over her, the heaviness in her chest, the exhaustion pressing down on her shoulders. But tonight there was something else, a tiny, flickering ember of curiosity. She changed into an old sweatshirt, made herself a cup of chamomile tea, and curled up on the couch with the book. She read about how anxiety wasn't just personal, it was cultural, how society fed people an endless stream of reasons to be afraid, how the pressure to always be achieving, always be doing, kept people locked in a cycle of stress. Emma thought about the emails that never stopped coming, the notifications that made her stomach tighten, the endless comparisons to people who seemed to have it all figured out. No wonder she felt like she was drowning. She turned another page and found an exercise. Step out of your anxiety spiral. It asked her to list 3 things she could see, 3 things she could hear, 3 things she could touch. A way to pull herself out of her head and into the present moment. She hesitated, then glanced around the room. The soft glow of the lamp beside her, the half-finished puzzle on the coffee table, the rain streaking down the window. She closed her eyes. The hum of the refrigerator, the distant sound of a car driving past, the quiet tick of the clock on the wall. She pulled the fleece blanket tighter around herself, the warmth of the teacup in her hands, the softness of the couch beneath her, the steady rise and fall of her own breath. When she opened her eyes, the world felt steadier. Maybe this was nothing. Maybe it wouldn't last. But for the first time in a long time, Emma felt like she wasn't drowning. And that, she thought, was enough for tonight. Emma woke up before her alarm. That almost never happened. For years, mornings had been the worst, waking up already exhausted, her mind racing before her feet even touched the floor. But today, something was different. The usual tightness in her chest was there, but it wasn't crushing her. It was manageable. She lay still for a moment, staring at the ceiling. Maybe it was just the tea. Maybe it was the book. Maybe it was nothing. But as she got up, made coffee, and got dressed for work, she caught herself doing something she had never done before. She was questioning her thoughts. The moment the anxiety started, what if my boss fires me today? Another thought followed. What if I'm wrong? The shift was subtle, but it was there, and it was enough to carry her through the motions of her morning without feeling like she was walking through a minefield. By the time she arrived at the office, her stomach was tight with nerves, but she wasn't spiraling. She gripped the book in her bag like a secret weapon. As she stepped inside, she braced herself. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead. The office smelled faintly of coffee and printer ink, and people moved around in their usual hurried way. Nothing had changed. But somehow, Emma felt like she had. She passed Rachel, her closest work friend, who gave her a curious look. "You're here early." Emma forced a smile. "Yeah, couldn't sleep." Rachel's eyes narrowed. "You okay?" "Yeah," Emma said automatically, and then to her own surprise, she added, "Just working on some stuff." Rachel didn't press, just nodded. "Well, if you need to vent later, I'm around." Emma nodded and made her way to her desk. At precisely 9 a.m., Emma's boss, Greg, called her into his office. As she walked in, her pulse quickened, but instead of drowning in worst-case scenarios, she focused on her surroundings. 3 things I can see: the framed degrees on the wall, the half-empty coffee cup on his desk, the stack of papers by his keyboard. She took a breath. 3 things I can hear: the hum of the AC, the distant ringing of a phone, the soft rustle of paper as he adjusts a file. She sat down, her hands folded in her lap. Greg looked up. "Emma, I wanted to check in with you." Her stomach clenched. "I know you've been under a lot of pressure lately," he continued, "and I've noticed you seem a little overwhelmed." Emma's face burned. He knows. He sees it. He knows I'm falling apart. But then, what if I'm wrong? She forced herself to stay present. Yeah, she admitted, her voice quieter than she intended. "I've been stressed." Greg nodded, leaning back in his chair. "Listen, I don't think you're doing a bad job. Actually, I think you're great at what you do. But I want to make sure you're not burning out." Emma blinked. "Wait, I'm not in trouble?" Greg frowned. "No, why would you think that?" She exhaled a sharp breath. I don't know. I just assumed the worst, because that's what I always do." Greg gave her a thoughtful look. "Emma, you're a good employee. You get things done, but I don't want you running yourself into the ground. If you need support, ask for it. We don't expect you to do everything alone." The word settled over her, strange and unfamiliar. She had spent so much time assuming she had to hold everything together by herself, that asking for help would mean admitting weakness. But what if she had been wrong about that too? Greg glanced at his screen. "That's all I wanted to say. Take care of yourself, okay?" Emma nodded slowly, still trying to process what had just happened. "Okay," she said, and for the first time in a long time, she almost meant it. Instead of eating lunch at her desk like she usually did, Emma grabbed her bag, slipped beyond anxiety inside, and walked to a small park a few blocks from the office. She found a bench under a tree and pulled out the book, flipping to the next chapter. "Hey, sorry to interrupt. If you're enjoying this story so far, consider hitting that subscribe button. Your support truly means the world to us. All right, let's continue." The chapter was about how curiosity and anxiety couldn't exist at the same time, how the brain couldn't be in full-blown panic mode and deeply curious at the same time. It explained that when people shifted their focus from fear to wonder, their anxiety lost its grip. What's another way to look at this? Emma let the question sit in her mind. She looked around the park. A man nearby was tossing breadcrumbs to pigeons. A mother was helping her toddler navigate the uneven sidewalk. A woman was reading on a blanket, twirling a strand of hair around her finger. She wondered about them. What was the man thinking about as he fed the birds? Did the mother feel as exhausted as she looked? What book was the woman reading? For the first time in weeks, maybe months, her thoughts weren't revolving around herself. The book was right. Her anxiety had momentarily quieted, not because she had forced it away, but because she had shifted her focus. It was a tiny change, but it felt huge. She turned back to the book, eager to learn more. By the time she got home, something had shifted inside her. Her worries weren't gone, but they weren't all-consuming either. She put on soft music, made herself a warm dinner, and lit a candle on the kitchen counter. Small things, but intentional things. Before bed, she opened the book again. The Art of Calm. This chapter talked about how creativity could be used to redirect anxiety, not by ignoring it, but by channeling it into something else. Writing, music, movement, even something as simple as doodling. Emma had never thought of herself as creative, but something about this idea called to her. She rummaged through a drawer until she found an old notebook, one she had bought years ago and never used. Opening to the first blank page, she hesitated. Then, without overthinking, she wrote, "What if my anxiety isn't the enemy? What if it's trying to tell me something?" The words sat on the page, solid and real. She didn't have the answers, not yet. But for the first time in a long time, she wanted to find out. The next morning, Emma woke up before her alarm again. She lay still for a moment, letting the quiet settle around her. It was happening. Something was shifting. The constant undercurrent of dread was still there, but it wasn't drowning her. It was more like background noise, something she could acknowledge without letting it control her. She thought back to the night before, to the words she had written in her notebook. What if my anxiety isn't the enemy? What if it's trying to tell me something? The question had been rolling around in her head ever since. She had spent years trying to fight her anxiety, to silence it, to outrun it. But what if it wasn't something to escape? What if it was a signal, something she needed to listen to instead of fear? She reached for her notebook, flipped to the next blank page, and wrote, "What is my anxiety trying to tell me?" At first, nothing came. But then, slowly, words began to form beneath her pen. That I'm afraid of failing. That I don't trust myself. That I think I have to do everything alone. That I don't believe I'm enough. Her breath caught in her throat. She had never put it into words before, never admitted it, not even to herself. But now, here it was. I don't believe I'm enough. Emma swallowed hard and stared at the sentence. And then, because she had nothing to lose, she wrote something else beneath it. What if I am? Emma walked into the office feeling different. Not better exactly, but aware. She still had deadlines. She still had emails piling up. She still had a long to-do list. But for the first time in forever, she didn't feel like she had to prove something with every little thing she did. And that felt huge. Rachel stopped by her desk mid-morning, coffee in hand. "So, did you survive your big boss meeting?" Emma smirked. "Turns out he wasn't planning to fire me." Rachel gasped dramatically. "Shocking. You mean your catastrophic thinking wasn't actually a reflection of reality?" Emma rolled her eyes but grinned. Rachel leaned against the desk. "Seriously, though, you seem, I don't know, less like you're about to pass out from stress." Emma hesitated, then reached into her bag and pulled out Beyond Anxiety. Rachel raised an eyebrow. A self-help book? Look at you, getting all introspective. Emma smirked. Don't make it weird. Rachel held up her hands. Hey, no judgment. Honestly, I could probably use something like that. My brain is a mess lately. Emma hesitated, then slid the book toward Rachel. Read the first chapter. If it helps, great. If not, no harm done. Rachel looked surprised, but took the book. Thanks. Emma shrugged. You're always telling me to take care of myself. Maybe you should too. Rachel gave her a small smile. Touché. That night, Emma felt restless. It wasn't the usual I can't turn my brain off kind of restless. It was something else. She didn't want to scroll on her phone, didn't want to binge a show. She wanted to do something. She remembered the chapter on creativity, the idea that anxiety and curiosity couldn't exist at the same time. And then she remembered the box of art supplies collecting dust in her closet. She pulled it out hesitantly, flipping through the sketchbook she had abandoned years ago. She had stopped drawing after college, telling herself it was a waste of time, that she needed to focus on real things. But tonight she wanted to try. She picked up a pencil and started sketching, not with any plan or expectation, just letting her hand move. Minutes passed, then an hour. And for the first time in years, she felt free. Not because her anxiety was gone, but because for once, she wasn't feeding it. She was creating instead. And that felt like a kind of magic. The next afternoon, Emma sat across from her mother in a quiet cafe, stirring her iced coffee with a straw. Her mother looked at her expectantly. So, how's work? Emma hesitated. Normally, she'd say fine and leave it at that, but today she decided to tell the truth. It's stressful, she admitted, but I'm working on it. Her mother's lips pressed into a thin line. Well, that's just how life is, Emma. Stress is part of being an adult. Emma clenched her jaw. This was always how these conversations went. She had spent her whole life trying to explain herself to a woman who didn't believe in feelings. But today she didn't feel like arguing. Instead, she heard a voice in her head, something she had read in Beyond Anxiety. You don't have to prove your emotions to anyone. She took a breath. I know, Mom. I'm just trying to find better ways to deal with it. Her mother sighed. Well, as long as you're not wasting time on any of that therapy nonsense. Emma didn't react, didn't take the bait. She just sipped her coffee and let it go. She couldn't change her mother, but she could change the way she responded. And that was enough. That night, Emma curled up in bed with her notebook and wrote, Things I did differently today. I didn't assume the worst at work. I let myself create something just for fun. I didn't let Mom's words get to me. Things I'm still working on. Trusting myself. Accepting that I don't have to be perfect. Letting go of control. She closed the notebook and exhaled. She wasn't fixed. She wasn't magically anxiety-free. But for the first time in a long time, she felt like she was moving forward. And that was everything. For the next few days, Emma found herself noticing things she had never paid attention to before. Like how her body tensed whenever she opened her inbox, how her shoulders crept toward her ears, how her stomach clenched before she even read the emails. Or how she instinctively apologized for things that weren't her fault, when someone else was late for a meeting, when the barista got her order wrong, when Rachel bumped into her in the office hallway. She had been moving through life like a tightly wound spring, constantly bracing for something to go wrong. But now she was aware of it. And that awareness changed everything. On Thursday, a coworker, Daniel, poked his head into her office just as she was about to leave for lunch. Hey, Emma, can you take a quick look at this report? Her instinct was to say yes, to push her plans aside and help because that's what she always did. But something in her paused. Do I actually have time for this right now? The answer was no. She took a breath. I can take a look this afternoon, but I was just about to step out for lunch. Daniel blinked, clearly not expecting that response. Oh, yeah, that's fine. This afternoon works. Emma waited for the guilt to hit, for that familiar wave of, you should have helped, but it didn't come. Instead, she felt something else. Relief. She had set a boundary, and the world hadn't ended. That night, Emma sat on her couch with Beyond Anxiety open in her lap, flipping through the pages she had marked. She found the chapter on the panic that never comes, a section that described how anxiety tricks people into believing that disaster is always around the corner, even when it isn't. She read about how the brain constantly predicts the worst possible outcome, even when there's no real evidence for it. How most of the things people worry about never actually happen. Emma leaned back against the cushions, thinking about all the times she had lost sleep over things that had turned out fine. The meetings she was convinced would go badly, the conversations she had rehearsed in her head 100 times, the fears that had taken up so much space in her mind only to dissolve into nothing. She set the book aside and reached for her notebook. At the top of a fresh page, she wrote, "Things I've worried about that never actually happened. That I was getting fired. That my boss thought I was incompetent. That Rachel was mad at me for canceling dinner plans. That I would embarrass myself in that big presentation. That Mom would stop talking to me if I set boundaries." She stared at the list. Every single one of those worries had felt so real at the time. They had consumed her, convinced her that catastrophe was imminent. And yet, none of them had come true. She tapped the pen against the paper, considering. Then she wrote, "What if most of my fears are just stories my brain is making up?" Friday night used to mean one of two things for Emma, either forcing herself to go out when she didn't really want to, or curling up on the couch, scrolling social media and feeling like everyone else had life figured out. But this Friday, she wanted something different. She thought about texting Rachel, maybe suggesting a movie or a late dinner, but before she could reach for her phone, she hesitated. Was she reaching out because she genuinely wanted to see someone? Or was she trying to distract herself from being alone? She let the question sit for a moment. And then, to her own surprise, she put the phone down. Tonight she would spend time with herself. Not in a lonely way, not in a distracted way. Just in a way that felt intentional. She ordered takeout from her favorite Thai place, lit a candle, and put on music instead of the TV. She ate slowly, savoring the flavors instead of scrolling mindlessly through her phone. After dinner, she picked up her sketchbook again. She drew the candle flickering in front of her, the curve of her tea mug, the outline of her own hand, palm open. And for the first time in forever, she felt at home with herself. Not waiting for someone to text her, not filling the silence with noise, just being. Saturday morning, Emma's phone rang. She glanced at the screen. Mom. A week ago, she would have sighed, bracing herself, but today she felt neutral. She answered, "Hey, Mom." Her mother sighed dramatically. "You haven't called all week." Emma smiled slightly. "I know, I've been busy." Silence. Then, "Is everything okay?" This was her mother's way of fishing, of trying to get Emma to reassure her, to slip back into old patterns. And Emma almost did. Almost softened, almost apologized, almost said, "I'm fine, don't worry." But instead she said, "Yeah, I'm good." She was good. Not perfect, not anxiety-free, but good. Her mother exhaled. "Well, don't forget to call your mother every now and then." Emma smiled. "I won't." And for the first time, she meant it. That evening, Emma sat on her balcony, wrapped in a blanket, watching the city lights blink against the dark sky. She thought about the past week, the small shifts, the moments where she had paused before reacting, the quiet victories. She wasn't fixed. She still had anxious thoughts. She still had fears. She still had moments where she wanted to retreat into old habits. But for the first time in a long time, she didn't feel like she was fighting a losing battle. She thought about something she had read in Beyond Anxiety, how change wasn't about flipping a switch. It was about small, intentional choices. And she was making them every day. She pulled her notebook onto her lap and wrote, "I am learning. I am growing. I am not the same person I was a month ago, and that's enough." She closed the notebook and leaned back. Not fixed, not perfect, but enough. And for now, that was more than enough. A month had passed since Emma found Beyond Anxiety at that gas station. It was strange, looking back. Nothing huge had changed. She still had the same job, the same apartment, the same life, but at the same time, everything felt different. She no longer woke up feeling like she was already behind, like she was bracing for disaster before the day even started. She still had anxious thoughts, sure, but they didn't consume her anymore. Instead of automatically believing them, she questioned them. Instead of running from them, she observed them. Instead of letting them define her, she reminded herself that she was more than her thoughts. And that shift, it changed everything. One afternoon, Rachel plopped into the chair across from Emma's desk, setting down her coffee with a dramatic sigh. "I think I need help," she announced. Emma blinked. "What kind of help?" Rachel sighed. "The mental kind." She hesitated, then admitted, "I finished that book you gave me." Emma sat up. "And?" Rachel ran a hand through her hair. "It was weirdly helpful. Like, I started noticing all the ways I stress myself out for no reason." She huffed. "It's annoying, honestly. Now I see it happening, and I can't unsee it." Emma smiled. "That's how it starts." Rachel tilted her head. "You really feel different, don't you?" Emma thought about it. "Yeah," she said simply. "I do." Rachel nodded slowly. "Okay, so therapy. Where do I even start?" Emma's heart swelled. If someone had told her a month ago that she'd be the one people turned to for advice about anxiety, she would have laughed. But here she was, not fixed, not perfect, but growing. And now, she could help someone else grow too. That night, Emma got an email from her boss. Her pulse spiked. She read the email 3 times, her heart hammering. A promotion? Immediately, her brain tried to spiral. What if I'm not ready? What if I mess it up? What if I fail? But then, she caught herself. She exhaled slowly, grounding herself. 3 things I can see: the glow of her laptop screen, the soft light from the lamp, the half-full cup of tea beside her. 3 things I can hear: the distant hum of traffic, the ticking of the clock, the quiet rustle of wind outside. She let the moment settle, let herself breathe. And then she smiled. Because this time, she knew what to do. She wasn't going to let fear make the decision for her. She hit reply. "Hi, Greg. I'd love to discuss this. Let me know when you're available." She pressed send. And just like that, she chose to step beyond spiral. A week later, Emma found herself back at the gas station where this all started. She hadn't planned to stop. She had just been driving past when something pulled her toward it. She walked inside, half expecting to see the book still sitting there, on the shelf, but it was gone. Instead, another book caught her eye. She smiled, because now she knew. The book wasn't magic. The change wasn't in the pages. It was in her all along. She had just needed a reminder, and now she would never forget again. If you've ever felt stuck in the spiral of anxiety, trapped in your own thoughts, convinced that fear will always have the final say, I want you to take a deep breath. Because here's the truth. You are not broken. Emma's story isn't just fiction. It's real. It's yours, mine, and so many others. It's proof that change doesn't happen in one grand, life-altering moment. It happens in small choices, choosing curiosity over fear, self-compassion over self-doubt, and courage over certainty. You don't have to fix yourself. You were never broken to begin with. And just like Emma, you have everything you need inside you already. All it takes is one small step, and then another, and another, until one day you look back and realize you've stepped beyond the spiral. Your story is still unfolding. Keep going.